A woman wanted a baby. How can I get a child? She thought. I know. I'll go and see the old woman. She knows about magic. She can help me. She went to the old woman's house. I want a baby, she said. Tell me, where can I get a child? Oh, that's very easy, the old woman said. Here's a magic flower. Plant it in a small box and wait. The woman went home with the magic flower and put it in a box. The next day there was another beautiful large flower in the box. This is a beautiful flower, said the woman, and she kissed it. She kissed it again and the flower opened. There was a baby girl inside the flower. She was a lovely little girl, but she was very, very small. She's very small, the woman said. I'll call her Thumbelina. Thumbelina lived inside her flower on the woman's table. One night, Thumbelina was asleep in her flower when an old toad came through the window. The toad was very big and very ugly. She jumped onto the table next to Thumbelina. Thumbelina is very beautiful. I want her to marry my son, thought the toad. She took the flower and Thumbelina and she jumped through the window and down into the garden. The toad lived with her son in a field near a river. Ah, her son was very ugly. He saw the beautiful little girl in the flower. Broke, 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 broke. He said, Don't speak, said the old toad. She'll wake up and run away. We'll put her in the river in this flower. Then she can't get away. The next morning, Thumbelina opened her eyes. She was on a big river and she was afraid. Where was the land? Where was her home? The old toad and her ugly son swam to Thumbelina. You'll be his wife. The old toad said, You'll live in a field near the river. Broke, 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 broke. Her son said, Little Thumbelina cried and cried. She did not want to live in the ugly toad's house. The little fish in the river heard her. They swam to her and looked at her sadly. Then they pushed the flower and it moved down the river. The little flowers started to move quickly. The toads were too slow and could not follow the flower. The little birds in the trees saw Thumbelina. She's a lovely little girl, they said. And the flower moved away down the river. A big beetle saw Thumbelina on her flower. He caught her and took her up into a tree. Then he sat with her in the tree and gave her a flower. Eat this, he said. I like you. You're not a beetle, but you're very pretty. The other beetles wanted to look at little Thumbelina. She's only got 2 legs, they said. She's very ugly. Is she a little girl? Girls are very ugly. The big beetle looked at Thumbelina again. My friends think she's ugly, he thought. She is ugly. He took her down from the tree and put her on a flower. Poor Thumbelina cried and cried. Nobody likes me, she thought. They all think I'm ugly. Poor Thumbelina lived in the great wood for a long time. She had no friends and she slept under a flower. It was winter and the days were very cold. The birds started to fly away and the flowers began to die. Then it started to snow. There was a big field near the wood. Thumbelina walked into the field and she came to a very small house. It was the home of a field mouse. Thumbelina stood at the door. "Poor little girl," said the field mouse. "You're sad and cold. Come into my house and eat some food." The field mouse liked Thumbelina. "You can stay with me through the winter," she said. "But I want you to tell me stories. I like stories." Every day Thumbelina told the field mouse a different story. Then one day the field mouse said, "My friend's coming to my house. He's very rich and he's got a big house. Marry him and you'll be very happy." But Thumbelina did not want to marry the mouse's friend. Her friend was a mole. "He's very rich and very clever," said the field mouse. "But he doesn't like the sun. He lives under the ground. He never sees the beautiful flowers." The mole came to the house and saw Thumbelina. He wanted her to sing for him. He heard her singing and he liked her. But he said nothing. He was a very quiet mole. The mole made a little road from his house, deep under the ground, to the field mouse's house. One day Thumbelina, the field mouse, and the mole walked down this road. Thumbelina saw a bird near the mole's house. That bird died because he was cold, Thumbelina said. She was very sad. She loved little birds. "Who wants to be a bird?" the mole asked. "Her bird says tweet tweet all day and flies up in the sky. But in winter it's very cold. Then the birds die." Thumbelina said nothing. The field mouse and the mole walked down the road. But she stayed with the bird. She kissed it. That night Thumbelina could not sleep. She got out of her bed and took some flowers to the bird. She made a bed from the flowers. "I'll make him warm," she thought. Then she sat down next to him. But the bird was not dead. He opened his eyes. The next night she went to the bird again. He was not dead, but he was very ill. He opened his eyes again and looked at Thumbelina. "Thank you, pretty little child." The bird said, "I'm warmer now. Tomorrow I'll get up and fly into the sky again." Thumbelina said, "Don't go. It's very cold. There's snow everywhere. Stay in your bed. I'll bring you food and water." The bird stayed there for days. And Thumbelina brought him water and a flower and some food. She did not tell the field mouse and the mole about the bird. One day it was warmer. The sun came out and the bird got up. "Look at the beautiful sun," he said to Thumbelina. "Come away with me. You can sit on my back." "No, I can't." Thumbelina said, "The mouse wants me to stay here." "Then, goodbye, goodbye, you good pretty girl," said the bird. He flew up and up into the sky. Thumbelina watched him. She liked the little bird. He was her friend. She started to cry. Tweet, 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 tweet. The bird sang and flew up and up. Thumbelina could not see him now. "You're going to marry the mole, Thumbelina," said the field mouse. "He wants you to be his wife. You'll be very happy. Start work and make some beautiful clothes." Thumbelina worked hard. Every night the mole visited her. "Next month it will be cooler. Then I'll marry you," he said. Every morning Thumbelina went outside and looked at the sun. "It's beautiful," she thought. I don't want to live under the ground. I'll never see the sun again. And I want to see my friend, the little bird. I can't marry the mole. She told the field mouse. You will marry him, said the field mouse. Marry him or I'll hurt you with my white teeth. One day the mole came to the field mouse's house. Today you're going to marry me, he said. Poor little Thumbelina was very sad. She went for a walk. Goodbye, son, she said. Then she heard a wonderful sound. Tweet, 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 tweet. Her friend, the bird, came down out of the sky. I don't want to marry the ugly mole, Thumbelina cried. And I don't want to live under the ground. I want to see the sun. It's nearly winter. The days will be cold again. The bird said. I'm going away to a warm country. Come with me. You can sit on my back. We'll go away from the ugly mole. Over the mountains. To a wonderful country with lovely flowers. Yes, I'll come with you, Thumbelina said. And climbed onto the bird's back. Then the bird and Thumbelina flew up into the sky. Over woods, across the sea, and over mountains. They came to a warm country. It was never cold there, and the sun looked bigger. There was fruit on the trees, and there were lovely flowers. Happy children played in the gardens. They stopped at some big trees near a white fa. My home's in those trees, the bird said. But you can't live in a tree. You'll have to live in a flower. Look at those beautiful flowers. Tell me, which flower do you like? I'll put you down on it. The bird flew down and put Thumbelina on a beautiful white flower. There was a little man inside it. A little man or woman lives in each flower. He said, I'm the prince of the little people. He's very beautiful, said Thumbelina to the bird. The little prince was afraid of the big bird, but he looked again at Thumbelina, and he felt happy. She was very, very pretty. What's your name? He asked her. Thumbelina, she said. I will marry you, said the prince. I'll make you princess of the flowers. Yes, yes, cried Thumbelina. A little man and a little lady. A little boy and a little girl came out of every flower. Everybody was happy. Thumbelina is an ugly name for a pretty girl. The prince said, We'll call you Maya. So Maya and the prince lived happily with their friends. In 1830, only a few miles away from what is now the great city of Cincinnati, Ohio, lay a huge and almost endless forest. The area had a few settlements established by people of the frontier. Many of them had already left the area for settlements further to the west. But among those remaining was a man who had been one of the first people to arrive there. He lived alone in a house of logs surrounded on all sides by the great forest. He seemed a part of the darkness and silence of the forest, for no one had ever known him to smile or speak an unnecessary word. His simple needs were supplied by selling or trading the skins of wild animals in the town. His little log house had a single door. Directly opposite was a window. The window was boarded up. No one could remember a time when it was not. And no one knew why it had been closed. I imagine there are few people living today who ever knew the secret of that window. But I am one, as you shall see. The man's name was said to be Malak. He appeared to be 70 years old, but he was really 50. Something other than years had been the cause of his aging. His hair and long, full beard were white. His gray, lifeless eyes were sunken. His face was wrinkled. He was tall and thin with drooping shoulders, like someone with many problems. I never saw him. These details I learned from my grandfather. He told me the man's story when I was a boy. He had known him when living nearby in that early day. One day Malak was found in his cabin, dead. It was not a time and place for medical examiners and newspapers. I suppose it was agreed that he had died from natural causes, or I should have been told, and should remember. I know only that the body was buried near the cabin, next to the burial place of his wife. She had died so many years before him that local tradition noted very little of her existence. That closes the final part of this true story, except for the incident that followed many years later. With a fearless spirit I went to the place and got close enough to the ruined cabin to throw a stone against it. I ran away to avoid the ghost which every well-informed boy in the area knew haunted the spot. But there is an earlier part to this story supplied by my grandfather. When Malak built his cabin he was young, strong, and full of hope. He began the hard work of creating a farm. He kept a gun-a rifle, for hunting to support himself. He had married a young woman, in all ways worthy of his honest love and loyalty. She shared the dangers of life with a willing spirit and a light heart. There is no known record of her name or details about her. They loved each other and were happy. One day Malak returned from hunting in a deep part of the forest. He found his wife sick with fever and confusion. There was no doctor or neighbor within miles. She was in no condition to be left alone while he went to find help. So Malak tried to take care of his wife and return her to good health. But at the end of the third day she fell into unconsciousness and died. From what we know about a man like Malak, we may try to imagine some of the details of the story told by my grandfather. When he was sure she was dead, Malak had sense enough to remember that the dead must be prepared for burial. He made a mistake now and again while performing this special duty. He did certain things wrong. And others which he did correctly were done over and over again. He was surprised that he did not cry, surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it is unkind not to cry for the dead. Tomorrow, he said out loud, I shall have to make the coffin and dig the grave, and then I shall miss her, when she is no longer in sight. But now, she is dead, of course, but it is all right, it must be all right, somehow. Things cannot be as bad as they seem. He stood over the body of his wife in the disappearing light. He fixed the hair and made finishing touches to the rest. He did all of this without thinking but with care. And still through his mind ran a feeling that all was right, that he should have her again as before, and everything would be explained. Malak had no experience in deep sadness. His heart could not contain it all. His imagination could not understand it. He did not know he was so hard struck. That knowledge would come later and never leave. Deep sadness is an artist of powers that affects people in different ways. To one it comes like the stroke of an arrow, shocking all the emotions to a sharper life. To another, it comes as the blow of a crushing strike. We may believe Malak to have been affected that way. Soon after he had finished his work, he sank into a chair by the side of the table upon which the body lay. He noted how white his wife's face looked in the deepening darkness. He laid his arms upon the table's edge and dropped his face into them, tearless and very sleepy. At that moment a long, screaming sound came in through the open window. It was like the cry of a lost child in the far deep of the darkening forest. But the men did not move. He heard that unearthly cry upon his failing sense, again and nearer than before. Maybe it was a wild animal, or maybe it was a dream. For Malak was asleep. Some hours later, he awoke, lifted his head from his arms and listened closely. He knew not why. There in the black darkness by the side of the body, he remembered everything without a shock. He strained his eyes to see, he knew not what. His senses were all alert. His breath was suspended. His blood was still as if to assist the silence. What had awakened him, and where was it? Suddenly the table shook under his arms. At the same time he heard, or imagined he heard, a light, soft step and then another. The sounds were as bare feet walking upon the floor. He was afraid beyond the power to cry out or move. He waited there in the darkness through what seemed like centuries of such fear. Fear as one may know, but yet live to tell. He tried but failed to speak the dead woman's name. He tried but failed to stretch his hand across the table to learn if she was there. His throat was powerless. His arms and hands were like lead. Then something most frightful happened. It seemed as if a heavy body was thrown against the table with a force that pushed against his chest. At the same time he heard and felt the fall of something upon the floor. It was so violent a crash that the whole house shook. A fight followed and a confusion of sounds impossible to describe. Malak had risen to his feet. Extreme fear had caused him to lose control of his senses. He threw his hands upon the table. Nothing was there. There is a point at which fear may turn to insanity, and insanity incites to action. With no definite plan and acting like a madman, Malak ran quickly to the wall. He seized his loaded rifle and without aim fired it. The flash from the rifle lit the room with a clear brightness. He saw a huge fierce panther dragging the dead woman toward the window. The wild animal's teeth were fixed on her throat. Then there was darkness blacker than before, and silence. When he returned to consciousness, the sun was high and the forest was filled with the sounds of singing birds. The body lay near the window, where the animal had left it when frightened away by the light and sound of the rifle. The clothing was ruined. The long hair was in disorder. The arms and legs lay in a careless way. And a pool of blood flowed from the horribly torn throat. The ribbon he had used to tie the wrists was broken. The hands were tightly closed. and between the teeth was a piece of the animal's ear.